Traoré's secret meeting with Chinese ambassador, $500 billion deal. Extended English version. Foreign Minister Dr. Olivia Ruamba stared at the document spread across the mahogany table with absolute horror etched across her face, her hands trembling as she grasped the magnitude of what lay before them. The implications of signing this agreement would fundamentally alter not just Burkina Faso's relationship with France, but the entire geopolitical landscape of Africa and its position in global power structures. Her voice carried a mixture of panic and desperate urgency as she addressed the president, who sat calmly reviewing the extensive documentation that would reshape an entire continent's destiny. The $500 billion Chinese investment package represented far more than simple economic cooperation between two nations. It constituted a comprehensive strategic partnership that would establish China as Africa's primary technological and infrastructure development partner, while simultaneously ending France's century-and-a-half dominance over West African economic and political affairs. Dr. Ruamba understood that this single agreement would trigger consequences that would reverberate through international relations for decades to come, fundamentally altering the balance of power between East and West in their competition for African resources and strategic influence. Ibrahim Traoré paused in his document review, setting down his pen with deliberate precision as he met his foreign minister's concerned gaze with a calm smile that reflected both his confidence in this historic decision and his complete understanding of its transformative implications. His response carried the weight of a leader who had spent years preparing for this exact moment, carefully calculating every potential consequence and benefit that would flow from this unprecedented partnership with the world's second-largest economy and Africa's most significant infrastructure development partner. The agreement scheduled for midnight signing would indeed change not only Burkina Faso but the entire African continent, establishing new patterns of international cooperation that prioritized mutual benefit over exploitative extraction and creating technological development pathways that would position Africa as a global leader rather than a perpetual source of raw materials for more developed nations. This was precisely the kind of transformative change that Traoré had envisioned when he first began developing his comprehensive strategy for African technological and economic independence. The setting for this historic agreement could not have been more carefully chosen or symbolically appropriate. The VIP salon on the top floor of the Cosium Hotel in Ouagadougou provided both the privacy necessary for such sensitive negotiations and the dignified atmosphere befitting an agreement that would reshape international relations across multiple continents. At 11:45 p.m., the atmosphere crackled with the tension of impending historic significance as representatives of two very different civilizations prepared to forge a partnership that would challenge centuries of Western dominance over African development priorities and resource allocation decisions. Chinese Ambassador Huang Ming sat across the table with his carefully selected team of 15 specialists, each expert in different aspects of the comprehensive development package that China was offering to its African partners. The red folder in Ambassador Huang's hands contained far more than a simple bilateral agreement. It represented a fundamental reimagining of China-Africa relations based on principles of mutual respect, shared prosperity, and technological cooperation that stood in stark contrast to the exploitative relationships that had characterized Africa's interactions with Western powers throughout the colonial and post-colonial periods. The 847-page agreement document that Ibrahim Traoré was methodically reviewing represented 3 years of intensive negotiations, careful planning, and strategic coordination between Chinese development experts and African leaders who shared a vision of continental transformation through technological advancement and infrastructure modernization. This was not merely an agreement between Burkina Faso and China, but rather the foundational document for a new model of international cooperation that would serve as a template for China's relationships with African nations committed to rapid modernization and technological independence. Dr. Ruamba's concerns about the agreement's impact on Franco-African relations were entirely justified from a traditional diplomatic perspective. The $500 billion investment package would indeed end France's 150-year hegemony over West African economic and political affairs, fundamentally altering the power dynamics that had enabled French corporations and financial institutions to extract enormous wealth from African resources while contributing minimal value to African development priorities. However, Traoré had carefully calculated that the benefits of Chinese partnership far outweighed the costs of French displeasure, particularly given France's increasingly limited ability to provide the kind of comprehensive technological and infrastructure development that Africa required for 21st century competitiveness. The detailed breakdown of the $500 billion investment package revealed the comprehensive scope of Chinese commitment to African development and modernization. $200 billion would be allocated to infrastructure projects including transportation networks, energy systems, telecommunications infrastructure, and urban development initiatives that would connect African communities and enable unprecedented levels of economic integration and development coordination across the continent. This infrastructure investment alone exceeded the total value of all Western development aid to Africa over the previous 2 decades, demonstrating China's serious commitment to African partnership and development. An additional $150 billion designated for technology transfer represented perhaps the most significant component of the agreement from a long-term strategic perspective. This investment would establish comprehensive technology sharing programs, advanced manufacturing facilities, research and development centers, and innovation hubs that would enable African nations to develop their own technological capabilities rather than remaining permanently dependent on foreign expertise and equipment. The technology transfer component included cutting-edge developments in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, renewable energy systems, advanced manufacturing processes, and space technology that would position Africa at the forefront of global technological advancement. The $100 billion allocated to education and healthcare initiatives reflected China's understanding that sustainable development required comprehensive human capital investment alongside infrastructure and technology development. This funding would establish world-class educational institutions, advanced medical facilities, research universities, and training programs that would develop the skilled workforce necessary to operate and maintain the technological systems being introduced through the partnership. The educational component specifically included programs designed to train African engineers, scientists, medical professionals, and technology specialists who would lead their continent's continued development long after the initial Chinese investment period concluded. The final $50 billion designated for military technology and security cooperation represented perhaps the most sensitive aspect of the agreement from a geopolitical perspective. This component would provide African partners with access to advanced defense technologies, cybersecurity systems, and security infrastructure that would enable them to protect their technological investments and maintain their independence from external interference. The security cooperation component was specifically designed to ensure that Africa's technological advancement could proceed without disruption from hostile forces seeking to maintain the continent's technological dependence and resource extraction relationships. Ambassador Huang Ming's fluent French eliminated the need for translation services while also demonstrating the depth of Chinese preparation for this partnership and their serious commitment to effective communication with their African counterparts. His explanation of the agreement went far beyond simple economic cooperation to encompass a comprehensive strategic alliance that would fundamentally alter the global balance of power and establish new patterns of South-South cooperation based on mutual respect and shared benefit rather than the exploitative relationships that had characterized North-South interactions throughout the colonial and post-colonial periods. Traoré's response to the ambassador's presentation reflected his deep understanding of Africa's historical experience with international partnerships and his determination to ensure that this new relationship would operate on fundamentally different principles than those that had governed Africa's interactions with Western powers. His reference to Africa's centuries of exploitation and the international community's systematic prevention of African development revealed his sophisticated understanding of the structural factors that had maintained African underdevelopment despite the continent's enormous natural and human resources. The tension in the room reflected everyone's understanding that this agreement would have implications extending far beyond the immediate participants to affect the entire African continent and its relationship with the global economy. The comprehensive nature of the Chinese proposal made it clear that this was not simply another development aid package, but rather a fundamental restructuring of international economic relationships that would establish Africa as a major player in global technology markets and advanced manufacturing sectors. One of the most striking components of the agreement involved the construction of 5 megacities across Africa that would operate entirely on sustainable energy systems while incorporating the world's most advanced technological infrastructure. These urban centers would serve as demonstration projects for sustainable development while also providing the concentrated technological and educational resources necessary to support Africa's rapid modernization and integration into global high-technology markets. The megacity project represented a completely new approach to urban development that combined Chinese expertise in rapid construction and infrastructure development with African needs for sustainable, technologically advanced urban environments. Finance Minister Dr. Sidao Ouedraogo's calculations revealed the staggering economic impact that the agreement would have on participating African nations. Burkina Faso's gross domestic product, currently valued at approximately $15 billion annually, would expand to over $300 billion within a decade of the agreement's implementation, representing a 20-fold increase that would transform the country from one of the world's least developed nations into a middle-income economy with advanced technological capabilities and diversified industrial sectors. Technology Minister Dr. Amina Keita's excitement reflected her understanding of how the proposed 50 technology and innovation centers would position Africa as a global leader in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and space technologies rather than remaining a consumer of technologies developed elsewhere. These centers would not only provide Africans with access to cutting-edge technological development resources, but would also serve as platforms for African innovation and technological advancement that could contribute to global technological progress while addressing specifically African challenges and opportunities. The African Digital Infrastructure Project represented perhaps the most ambitious component of the entire agreement, encompassing the construction of a comprehensive fiber optic network that would extend high-speed internet access to every African village while also establishing the continent's independent satellite communication systems. This digital infrastructure would eliminate Africa's dependence on external telecommunications providers while also creating the technological foundation necessary for advanced economic activities including digital finance, e-commerce, remote education, and telemedicine services that would dramatically improve the quality of life for hundreds of millions of Africans. Ambassador Huang's holographic presentation of the 25 mega-industrial zones plan for construction across Africa demonstrated the scale and sophistication of Chinese commitment to African industrialization and technological advancement. These industrial centers would enable Africa to produce everything from automobiles to semiconductor components, fundamentally altering the continent's role in global supply chains from a source of raw materials to a manufacturer of high-value-added products that would generate substantial employment and economic growth for African communities. The African Space Program component of the agreement represented perhaps the most symbolic aspect of the partnership, establishing Africa's first space launch facility in Burkina Faso while also developing the continental satellite systems necessary for independent telecommunications, weather monitoring, agricultural planning, and natural resource management. Within 10 years of the agreement's implementation, Africa would possess its own satellite constellation and space launch capabilities, positioning the continent as a significant player in the global space economy while also providing the technological infrastructure necessary for advanced agricultural, environmental, and communications applications. Dr. Ruamba's continued concerns about French reactions reflected her realistic understanding of how dramatically this agreement would alter existing international relationships and power structures. France's likely implementation of economic sanctions and its attempts to interfere with CFA franc currency systems represented predictable responses to the loss of its privileged position in African economic affairs, but these traditional tools of French influence had been significantly weakened by Africa's development of independent financial systems and alternative international partnerships. Traoré's confident response regarding the Afrigold currency system demonstrated his careful preparation for exactly these kinds of French reactions and his understanding that Africa's financial independence provided the foundation for broader technological and political independence. The successful implementation of blockchain-based African currency systems had already demonstrated that African nations could operate independently of traditional Western financial institutions while also providing more efficient and equitable financial services for their populations. Ambassador Huang's commitment to conducting all China-Africa trade through Afrigold systems represented a crucial validation of African financial independence while also providing the international recognition and utilization necessary to establish Afrigold as a significant factor in global currency markets. This Chinese support for African monetary independence would accelerate the development of alternative international financial systems while reducing the effectiveness of traditional Western economic pressure tactics. The educational component of the agreement, involving the establishment of 100 technical universities across Africa and the provision of advanced technological education to 1 million young Africans, represented an investment in human capital development that would generate benefits for generations to come. These educational institutions would specialize in artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, and space engineering, providing African students with access to the same advanced educational opportunities available in the world's most developed countries while also addressing specifically African technological challenges and opportunities. As midnight approached, the historic significance of the moment was palpable throughout the hotel salon. French intelligence agents monitoring the hotel from external positions represented the old order of African international relations, while inside the building, Africa's future was being shaped through partnership agreements based on mutual respect and shared benefit rather than exploitation and resource extraction. Internal Intelligence Director Alexandra Bambara's warning about French Ambassador Philippe Lalliot's urgent meeting requests reflected the immediate pressure that Western powers would apply to prevent this fundamental alteration of African international relationships. However, Traoré's determined response demonstrated his understanding that 60 years of French pressure and interference had prevented African development and that the time had come to establish relationships based on African interests rather than external demands for continued subordination. Ambassador Huang's final presentation of the employment creation component, involving the establishment of 5 million new jobs across participating African nations, addressed one of the continent's most pressing challenges while also providing young Africans with alternatives to emigration to Europe. The comprehensive nature of these employment opportunities, spanning from high-technology manufacturing to advanced services sectors, would enable African communities to retain their most talented and ambitious young people while also developing the skilled workforce necessary for continued technological advancement and economic growth. The final moments before the agreement signing were filled with both excitement and apprehension as everyone present understood the historic significance of what was about to occur. Dr. Keita's encouragement reflected her understanding that such comprehensive partnership opportunities were extremely rare in international relations and that Africa's 21st century development prospects depended heavily on accessing the kind of technological and financial resources that China was offering through this unprecedented agreement. Finance Minister Ouedraogo's supporting calculations regarding poverty reduction demonstrated the agreement's potential to achieve in 1 decade what traditional development approaches had failed to accomplish over multiple generations. The reduction of African poverty rates to below 5% within 10 years would represent one of the most successful poverty alleviation programs in human history while also providing the social stability necessary for continued technological advancement and economic growth. At exactly midnight, the moment of signature arrived with both leaders fully understanding the transformative implications of their actions for Africa's future development and its relationship with the global economy. This was not merely a bilateral agreement between two nations, but rather the foundation for a new model of international cooperation that would establish Africa as a major player in global technology markets and advanced manufacturing sectors. Traoré's words as he prepared to sign reflected his vision of Africa as a global leader rather than a perpetual recipient of aid and development assistance from more advanced nations. The agreement represented the practical implementation of African technological sovereignty and economic independence that had been theoretical goals for decades but were now becoming achievable realities through strategic partnership with nations committed to genuine cooperation rather than continued exploitation. The first signature marked a historic turning point not just for Burkina Faso or even Africa, but for the entire structure of international economic relationships and the global balance of technological and financial power. Ambassador Huang's reciprocal signature completed the formal establishment of a partnership that would serve as a model for South-South cooperation while also demonstrating alternative approaches to international development that prioritized mutual benefit over exploitative extraction of resources and wealth. The immediate activation of Chinese communication systems following the agreement's signature demonstrated the seriousness and comprehensiveness of Chinese commitment to the partnership while also providing immediate evidence of the technological capabilities that would be shared with African partners. Congratulatory messages from Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and other major Chinese cities reflected the high-level political support that the agreement enjoyed within Chinese leadership circles, while President Xi Jinping's personal message emphasized the strategic importance that China placed on successful Africa partnership development. The following morning's global reaction would indeed shock international observers who had underestimated both African aspirations for genuine development partnership and Chinese willingness to provide the comprehensive support necessary for African technological advancement and economic transformation. France, the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Western powers would find themselves completely unprepared for the speed and scope of African technological and economic transformation that this agreement would enable. Traoré's careful preparation for Western reactions reflected his sophisticated understanding of international power dynamics and his determination to ensure that African development could proceed despite predictable Western attempts to maintain exploitative relationships and prevent African technological advancement. The agreement's confidential military support provisions would provide African partners with the security capabilities necessary to protect their technological investments while also deterring external interference in African development processes. Ambassador Huang's farewell remarks captured the transformative vision that motivated both Chinese and African leaders in developing this unprecedented partnership agreement. The prediction that Africa would become the world's most advanced continent within a decade reflected serious analysis of African potential combined with Chinese technological and financial capabilities rather than mere diplomatic pleasantries or unrealistic optimism about development prospects. Traoré's response emphasized his understanding of Africa's historically underutilized potential and his confidence that appropriate technological and financial support would enable the continent to achieve global leadership in multiple sectors while also addressing the development needs of African populations who have been systematically excluded from the benefits of technological advancement and economic growth. The French ambassador's angry confrontation 3 hours after the agreement's signature demonstrated both the speed with which Western intelligence services detected the fundamental alteration of African international relationships and the intensity of Western concern about losing privileged access to African resources and markets. Philippe Lalliot's trembling hands and flushed face reflected genuine panic about the implications of African technological independence for traditional patterns of French economic and political dominance. Traoré's calm response to French threats and complaints reflected his careful preparation for exactly these kinds of Western reactions while also demonstrating his understanding that genuinely beneficial international relationships must be based on mutual respect and shared benefit rather than one-sided exploitation disguised as historical friendship or cultural connection. Lalliot's threats of economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation represented traditional Western approaches to maintaining African subordination, but these tools have been significantly weakened by African development of alternative international partnerships and independent technological capabilities that reduce dependence on Western approval or cooperation for continued development and prosperity. Traoré's confident reference to Chinese support and African unity reflected the strategic thinking that had enabled this historic agreement while also demonstrating his understanding that successful resistance to Western pressure required both strong international partnerships and continental coordination among African leaders committed to genuine independence and technological advancement. The afternoon's national television address provided Traoré with the opportunity to explain directly to his population the transformative implications of the previous night's agreement while also building popular support for the challenging transition period that would inevitably accompany such fundamental changes in international relationships and development strategies. The positive popular reaction in Ouagadougou streets reflected African populations' enthusiasm for genuine development opportunities and their understanding that traditional approaches to African development had failed to deliver the prosperity and technological advancement that other regions had achieved through appropriate international partnerships and consistent investment in human capital and technological infrastructure. However, Traoré understood that the agreement's signature represented only the beginning of a comprehensive transformation process that would require sustained effort, strategic coordination, and careful management of both opportunities and challenges over multiple years and decades to achieve the full potential benefits that the partnership offered for African development and global competitiveness. 6 months after the agreement's implementation, the visible results included extensive construction projects, thousands of Chinese engineers and technicians working alongside African counterparts, and the beginning of Africa's first megacity construction near Ouagadougou. These immediate developments provided tangible evidence of Chinese commitment to the partnership while also demonstrating the speed with which comprehensive development programs could produce visible results when supported by adequate financial resources and technological expertise. On the first anniversary of the agreement, Traoré's evaluation reflected justified pride in the transformative changes that had already begun while also acknowledging that the 10-year timeline for achieving African global leadership in technology and economic development represented an ambitious but achievable goal given the comprehensive nature of the Chinese partnership and the determination of African leaders to maximize the benefits of this unprecedented opportunity for continental transformation and technological advancement.